Thank you for the invitation to share a few reflections at this summer convention. The theme of this year, Exploring the Unexplained, is a challenging one. At least it was for me. As I was considering this subject, it became, more than anything, an invitation to look deeper into the nature of exploring. What are the ways in which we explore? What are the means by which we do such exploration? And then, what is the unexplained? And unexplained for whom? All of what has been placed under the category of the unexplained is within this realm of phenomena. It occurs and it is observable within this manifested universe. We call it unexplained because humanity hasn't found an explanation for it that falls within the frame of the known. So far, we haven't found a rational or logical explanation that can be perceived with the five senses or supported by scientific evidence. These are aspects of life, of nature, that we don't know why they occur or how they occur. We are not able to attribute them to an identified cause or law. The limitation we have is that the five senses, our tools of observation, are confined to the physical world. And the phenomena we measure at this physical level may be responding to a law or a noumenon that is not perceivable by them. This makes observations more complex, as sometimes an effect that manifests at one level of reality can have its cause at a different level of reality. Examples we have verified many times through experience are, the times in which emotional distress caused indigestion in the physical body, or mental stress caused insomnia or tangible tension in the cervical spine. So from these everyday experiences, we can extrapolate that different levels of reality can affect one another. And what manifests at one level can have a cause at a different level of existence. So to see the whole picture, we would need the senses that can perceive at the level in which the cause or the law exists. Although scientific research has been so helpful in unveiling elements of the mysteries that surround us, we are also aware of the limitations of science as it deals with the measurable effects in the physical world. But even when we can explain some of the visible effects of phenomena through reason or scientific research, what still remains unknown is what causes them. What still remains to be perceived is the full extent of the mystery. When we plant a seed, for example, far into the ground, in complete darkness, the seedling seeks the light, always in the right direction. How does the seed know in which direction to grow the roots and in which direction to shoot the stem? Science postulates that plants have gravity sensing cells that allow them to know in which direction to send their roots toward water and nutrients, and in which direction to seek the light. But what science cannot tell us is how a cell can sense gravity. Like that, so many other examples. The fact that A female body can create a baby, a perfect body inside herself, with the enormous complexity that process entails, without any conscious intervention on the mother's part. Regardless of how precisely we can describe and name that process in scientific terms, what guides that unfoldment still remains unknown to us and to science. Every night we go to sleep and we still don't know why. We dream and we don't know why. The atoms of your body are made of the same type of atoms as the chair in which you're sitting right now. But your body doesn't go through the chair. It remains as a solid object, and so does the chair. And we don't know why. Countless other mysteries surround us. So from this perspective, all life still remains unexplained. When we pause for a moment to contemplate the millions of wonders happening around us every day, every second, we are left with the clear feeling that behind what we see, there is so much more that we don't. And if we pause a little longer and stay open and receptive to that one mystery that we're contemplating, we may even have a glimpse of being in the presence of something sacred. When we pause and don't assume we know, when we pause and try to see, truly see, what has become mundane by repetition, there may be some possibilities on finding answers. Those answers may not look like numbers or facts. They may instead feel like a profound sense of reverence, or like a knowing that transcends reason, but leaves us transformed. My feeling is that as we progressively experience reality as it is, the truth of things as they are, we will come to the realization that nothing is, in fact, as we think it is. But at the speed in which we live, at the speed in which society pushes us to live, so concerned with what to accomplish next, there is very little time to pause and contemplate any mystery. The speed of communication has increased radically, and we have molded life, work, and relationships to that speed. So the measure of our value is based on how much we produce. The tragedy in that is that in the rush, there is no time to fully experience. So we label what we see as something we know, as something we have seen many times before, or as something we have been doing since we were born, closing the door to the questions that may arise from contemplating without quick answers. In this Google era, there is no time for wonder anymore. Remember the times when you had a question and had to keep it marinated in you for a long time until you could find the right book or the right person that may have an answer, giving you in the meantime the chance to come up with your own theories. Well, those days are gone. And the time between not knowing and knowing is so brief that knowing feels exactly like not knowing. In that immediacy, questions and answers lose their impact. When we read the lives of spiritual seekers, it was always the question, the doubt, the struggle of not knowing, and the yearning to know the unknowable what pulled them into the next level of experience. So when we become accustomed to these daily mysteries or don't have time for them, we stop questioning and we stop seeing their magnificence. But what's even a greater loss is when we take the extraordinary and make it ordinary. We lose that moment full of potential to unfold our dormant inner knowing and our spiritual intuition. We go as far as to take a mystery and make it superficial or commercialize it. We turn it into something that becomes irrelevant compared to the importance that it had on its own. Sleeping, for example. A person can live an entire life without ever questioning why they go to sleep and where they go when they sleep. Why do we dream? What are dreams? We spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping. It must have a much more relevant significance than just resetting the brain. Sleeping is bizarre from any angle you want to look at it. It's one of the most unexplained things we do in life. But we're much more concerned about what is the best mattress to sleep in. In the US, you can spend months researching what mattress to buy or which of the latest 12 different pillows are best for you. So when we take a mystery and make it mundane or make it about something else, we inadvertently move our attention from the important to the unimportant. It becomes a level of blindness. Humanity in general, I think, shares an exaggerated concern for the form and a disregard for the essence. For the most part, we are people who live in the circumference of life, at the edges of experience, at the surface of things, and have little access to the center, to what's important. But the center is always available to be discovered. The longer we stay in the circumference, the more we forget the center. But when we seek to be in the center and stay in it, we move closer to a current of life that opens us up to the realization that there was never a circumference. Now, looking into the ways in which we go about exploring the unexplained, when we do explore it, it tends to begin by holding on to a philosophical perspective that we choose to embrace. We create a certain structure based on a tradition or several of them. And then we continue to add to it, mostly the elements that resonate with that initial structure. This process in isolation is invariably incomplete and subjective. And it will always be, as long as it is limited to the intellect. And since we're talking about this, it is worth mentioning that one of the peculiarities of being human is that my philosophical perspective is always superior to my neighbor's. This is a behavior to pay close attention to. It can exist as a very subtle sense of superiority and go as far as to cause wars or take away the rights of others, as it is happening in this country and many others. So from time to time, we can look at our belief system dispassionately and remind ourselves that it is a limited viewpoint, as limited and conditioned as anyone else's. And as long as the seed of feeling superior exists, we are impeded to reach spiritual knowledge that in itself becomes an obstacle. The less room we have in that rigid structure, the least there can be expansion. So from time to time, I can check within and ask myself, how open am I to consider possibilities that differ from the structures I have created? Knowledge can be so inspiring. It has the potential to show us a glimpse of the unimaginable and pull us there, however briefly. When we read in esoteric philosophy that every atom is a little universe in itself, and that every cell in the human body has a brain and remembers, the possibilities are endless. And we can spend a lifetime meditating on that one thought alone. And like that, with so many other ideas and thoughts and concepts. And knowledge can be an obstacle too. Some beliefs can close the door to valuable experiences. There is this real account of a teacher and one of his nuns, in which the nun felt she had been for a long time at the door of entering a deeper state of meditation. And after looking within for some time, she came to the realization that what has stopped her was the feeling that she didn't deserve it. It was a certain ill will toward herself, the reluctance to allow herself that gift. In a similar way, we can all unconsciously encourage thoughts that can be obstacles to experiencing something that we are ready and prepared to experience. It could be a concept, it could be lack of self-value because of something we read, or because it is a common belief within the spiritual circles we are in. Lack of love, of compassion toward oneself is also a big impediment. Fear is another, one of the most powerful ones in terms of the doors that can close. Perhaps the only one there is, disguised in different forms. Sometimes it disguises as discernment, sometimes as self-righteousness. So our way of thinking conditions spiritual experience in many ways. But the one I am interested in pointing out is this one. If we believe that something is not possible, it won't be. If we believe we don't deserve something, we won't. If we believe the path is only full of perils, or that we're so very imperfect that we're not even worth the effort, that's how it will be. But the opposites are also true. Theosophy postulates that in every incarnation, the new personality not only catches up with past habits and tendencies, but also with the level of spiritual unfoldment that was established then. So the soul has to remember and develop what was already developed in the previous lifetime every time. So we don't know where we left off. And we can only find out by trying. Now, there is something as powerful or even more powerful than ideas, and those are experiences. Experiences can not only change or reshape our ideas, they can also transform us. A direct experience of a truth, even when partial, can take us to a different level of knowing, to a higher level of seeing or understanding. If we look back into our lives, we may be able to see that growth, unfoldment happens in the form of a spiral. We don't know where in the spiral we are, but we can identify that somehow experiences repeat, hardly ever in the same exact way or at the same level, but their flavor is known to us. From one point in time to the other, there has been growth, even when minimal. So we meet that experience again, but this time from a slightly different place. Sometimes we talk about the difference between study and practice, and that without practice, study cannot be internalized. I see those two aspects as part of the movement in this spiral I'm talking about. Let's say that first we become exposed to a philosophy and grasp some ideas intellectually. Then we apply a few of them in our lives. And as we apply them, experience is gained, and that experience transforms us. So it's not practice per se what is transformational, but it is the experience that arises from that practice that produces a transformation that nothing else can. So at that point, we move to a slightly higher level of the spiral. And from there, study is encountered from a new perspective. Books we had read now reveal elements we hadn't seen before. Father Richard Rohr, whom I consider one of the finest theosophists within the Catholic Church, said something worth considering. He said, "We do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking." In other words, it is experience that opens the doors to the next level, even new levels of thinking. So how are we doing in the balance of knowing and living, of thinking and experiencing? Most of us can think a lot more profound thoughts than we can live. At least I can say that for myself. The amount of knowledge we possess is greater than the amount of knowledge that we are ready to experience. So I feel that by living one or two powerful questions at a time, or one or two fundamental tenets at a time, every day, progress accelerates. Because the point is to live everything, as the famous poem says. Some answers are given to us only when we are able to love the questions enough. Imagine, if a cell can remember, so can we. We have been called a microcosm, gods in exile. It has been said that the human being has the potential to come into contact with every realm of being in the universe. And that knowing ourselves, we will know the universe. Because our spiritual self is identical in its essence with the universal spirit. We came prepared. Not that we came with the answers. We are the answers. So to explore the unexplained, questions become important, an overall attitude of inquiry. And remembering becomes important too. What kind of questions and what kind of remembering? Let's start with the questions first. Sometimes we wake up in the morning and we don't remember if we had a dream or not. So we get up from bed and start our day as usual. But if instead, at that moment, the moment we wake up, we ask ourselves with intention, where was I last night? What did I dream about? We may not have a response the first few days, but after some time, we start seeing pieces of the dream, faint images of what happened. So somehow we went from remembering nothing to remembering something. With the question and the effort of remembering, we were able to recollect parts of them. The more we ask that question, the more we remember our dreams. And if we start writing them down, we begin to remember even more. Carl Jung said that the dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul. So there is a lot of room for remembrance in dreams. They all reveal some level of inner truth. Not as we would like it to be, but as it is. And sometimes through the recollection of dreams, we can remember spiritual truths that we already know, but not consciously yet. So we ask questions to open the way through which answers can come. A well-known Advaita teacher, Ramana Maharshi, talked about the power of one question. Who am I? A question that is not meant to get an answer, but dissolve the questioner and bring us back to the center of experience. Just remaining conscious of being conscious without identification with anything. In this context and in every other, after asking, listening is crucial. The answers can come in unexpected ways. And about remembering, some traditions speak of self-remembrance, both as the returning to this moment and as the acknowledgement of the ever-present spiritual self within us. Remembering we are here brings us back to this moment. And coming back into this moment, we remember the palpitating presence of the divine in everything, within and without. That conscious self-remembrance has power. Consciousness vivifies whatever it touches. It is like a fertilizer. Where consciousness goes with intention, that unfolds or awakens. According to the teachings, what we begin to remember comes from the memory of the heart. Most spiritual traditions point out that the divine spark is in the human heart. This is a repeated, emphasized reference across traditions. I could quote from ours, from so many different sources, but we can summarize it in this way. The heart is the seat in the human body of Buddhic consciousness, of unity consciousness. It is the organ and the center through which the divine self is constantly seeking to impress, to reach the distracted personal self. So we can say that the awakening of consciousness is the opening of the heart. Through the heart, one knows truth, says one of the Upanishads. In the book, The Science of Yoga, Dr. Taimni writes that the whole aim and process of yoga consists in withdrawing the consciousness from without to within. Because he says the ultimate mystery of life is hidden in the very heart of our being and can be found only there and nowhere else. So from this perspective, exploring the ultimate mystery of life, exploring the unexplained, is the journey within. The falling of veil after veil as we turn inwards. Experiencing one by one the dimensions of being that still remain unexplored. And Sri Ram, in one of his articles, says, all that is beyond what we can see directly for ourselves, while it may be interesting as a matter of study, it cannot really come under the description of theosophy as divine wisdom. We must not, he says, we must not confuse knowledge, even of the occult side of nature, with wisdom, which springs from the depths of a certain nature in ourselves. Now, to reach the heart of our being, to reach this certain nature in ourselves, there are conditions. Otherwise, we would all be there already. Inner silence is one of the important ones. The complete stillness of the mind. The silent aware of this moment. For which we need to empty ourselves of all mental movement that clings to the personal self, to the past, to the projections in the future, to authorities, to the ideas I have about myself, the ways I want to control life as if I could. Becoming empty and dwelling in spacious being. Emptying feels good, feels peaceful, feels weightless. When we stop identifying with the stories we create in the mind by dropping them, there is just space and well-being. Sometimes there is sensation, but it's mostly space and well-being. And arriving at stillness doesn't need to feel like a struggle. We can think of it as resting. Resting from the inner noise, resting from all the wanting, resting from pushing things away, from the limitations of the personal self, resting in a silence that can feel a lot like a loving embrace. Resting, but extraordinarily awake. The more we taste silence, the more we long for it. And the more we stay in silence, the more we discover that there are layers and layers of silence. The heart responds to our willingness to listen with longing. Longing is the call from the heart. It is the self whispering us to remember. And we can rest in that longing, breathe into it, become profoundly in touch with it, listen to it. It is like a sacred love affair. The more we spend time with the heart, the more the heart calls us into its presence. And we don't have to be perfect to sit in silence. We are received as we come. If there is sincerity in our willingness to be in silence, we will see all our limitations. We will see where we're stuck and what separates us from the heart. And the longing to be one with it will become strong enough to help us drop the rest, to help us drop all that is not aligned with oneness. This is done with love. In love, we enter. In love, we are received. In love, we empty ourselves. In love, we see all our limitations, like a mother sees her child. And in that same love, we rest again and again. If the word love doesn't inspire you, you can use another one. Compassion, kindness, unconditional friendship. One of the qualities that in this journey that is this journey within that often goes overlooked is honesty. Honesty is hard because our ideal is high. And it's so high that we want to be there, but we're not there yet. And we don't realize that the more honest we are with ourselves and our imperfections, the easiest the journey becomes. That is true humility. Humility is not considering myself less than others, but knowing myself as I am and still loving myself as much as I love everyone else and everything else. This is one of the hardest tasks. If there is no acceptance of who I am, then I will be hiding parts of me that I need to see to be able to be free from them. In that freedom, the door to the next step can open up. We project these ideas of perfection on the spiritual leaders of the past, whose work we respect and admire so much. And yes, we have to admit that they were quite remarkable people, especially in their level of selflessness and dedication. But they were fallible too. They were imperfect. They all struggled. They all go cranky like the rest of us. If we project unrealistic heights on others, then our path feels so poorly human compared to theirs that we may feel discouraged. But neither of those extremes are true. The path is as human as it is divine for all of us. And we start every day from where we are. In connection to the heart and the trying, Madame Blavatsky writes that the effort should be continually made to center the consciousness in the heart and to listen for the promptings of the spiritual consciousness. And she says, for though success be far off, a beginning must be made and the path opened up. So no matter where we are, the nature of the work is the same. And it is possible. And it has to be started. We came prepared for this journey. Like the earth that turns around the sun, the heart of the solar system, we turn around our own heart. Like the flower that opens only at the right time, we too know our inner seasons. Like the seedling buried in the dirt, we too can sense in which direction to seek the light. We came prepared for it. If we stay with the question, if we listen, and if we try. They say that those who seek wholeheartedly end up finding. Thank you.